The official and popular narrative for the start of war between the United States and Japan is that on December 7, 1941, Japanese planes bombed the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan. But the fact is that the U.S. was operating fighting forces against the Japanese in China since April 1941, fully 8 months prior to Pearl Harbor. So who were these fighting forces? And how could they have been responsible for the war in the Pacific between the U.S. and Japan? Let's take a look. I am of course talking about the famous Flying Tigers commanded by Claire Lee Chennault. Just to be clear, I am not denigrating the brave volunteers who joined the Flying Tigers. These were seriously talented pilots who claimed 297 enemy aircraft destroyed and boasted 19 air aces in their ranks, including Tex Hill, R.T. Smith, and Pappy Boyington. But to be clear-eyed, the Flying Tigers, officially known as the 1st American Volunteer Group, or AVG, whilst fighting under the Chinese flag, were funded and commanded by the U.S. military and with President Franklin Roosevelt's authority. Formed initially of 100 Curtiss P-40B Warhawks split into 3 fighter squadrons of around 30 each, Chennault was already busy recruiting for the 2nd American Volunteer Group when the first arrived. The 2nd American Volunteer Group would have consisted of 82 pilots and 359 ground crew from the U.S. Army, 33 Lockheed A-28s and 33 Douglas A-20 bombers. When war was declared, the A-20s and ground crew were in transit via sea to China, and the pilots were due to fly the A-28s on the 10th of April, just 3 days after Pearl Harbor. But with war declared, the American volunteer groups were disbanded, absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Force. The vessels at sea were diverted to Australia, the aircraft were taken back into American service, and most of the personnel rejoined the military, either in Australia or in the U.S. Chennault himself was promoted to Brigadier General, commanding U.S. Army air units in China. In all, the initial plan for the American volunteer groups was for the U.S. to implement 200 fighter aircraft and 66 light bombers to join the fight on the side of China against the Japanese, including U.S. pilots and ground crew recruited from the Army, Marine and Navy arms of the U.S. forces. Without the intervention of Pearl Harbor, a 3rd volunteer group was slated for creation, and reason would deduce that continued U.S. military involvement against Japan would be funneled into China via the AVG program. So I think it's fair to ask, which side was it that actually initiated war between the U.S. and Japan? In fact, was the attack on Pearl Harbor justified retaliation for U.S. involvement in the Second Sino-Chinese War? An interesting debate at the least, especially given the high level of non-interventionist sentiment in the U.S. at the time. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this post, please like and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.